I care more about your fantasy football team doing well than whether you like me or not. So I'm going to talk about some players that I think will actually disappoint going into the future, even if they had incredible week one performances. Like with Garrett Wilson specifically, I know we made this video before week one, so maybe this is copium. And honestly, you can just call me a clown for this. I'm completely okay with it. But what we had with this game against the Pittsburgh Steelers was the New York Jets going out there and dropping about 30 total points. Now, if we go through and if we look at all the history that we have from both the New York Jets as well as Justin Fields, if I was a betting man, which I technically am and I'm not good at it, I would say that very rarely are we going to see this type of overall offensive output in New York. Very rarely should we expect over 400 total yards and 4+ touchdowns. Now, with that in mind, we just had the best case scenario you could ever ask for when it comes to Garrett Wilson production. And what was that true ceiling that we saw? It was a total of 9 targets, 7 receptions, 95 receiving yards, and a receiving touchdown, which is great. Don't get me wrong. But if your true ceiling is 22 fantasy points, what happens if we actually see this offense struggle? What happens if we see, I don't know, maybe there not be a touchdown that goes over to Garrett Wilson? I think the floor with Wilson is still going to be hovering around 10 to 11 fantasy points, and the ceiling is going to be severely capped due to the passing volume. We had 39 rush attempts in comparison to 22 pass attempts. We had 182 rushing yards in comparison to 218 passing yards. So this is an extremely run-heavy offense. I am not going to be telling you to sell Justin Fields because, frankly, I think Justin Fields can be a bad real-life NFL quarterback while still being elite in fantasy because he's going to run the ball so effectively that is just going to cap the ceiling of Garrett Wilson. Maybe you say, oh, Mason, you're just too low on the Jets. My thing is we go through and we look at future predictions. Right now, sportsbooks have the New York Jets as a bottom 5 scoring offense in the league this next week against the Buffalo Bills. So realistically, I think you're going to see heavy regression. So if I were to go through and look at some of these recent trades that were done with the trade finder on flockfantasy.com, we saw somebody trade Garrett Wilson and Zay Flowers, another receiver we'll talk about in a second, for Drake London. We saw somebody trade Garrett Wilson and Igbuka, another wide receiver we'll talk about in a second, for Ashton Jinty, and we saw somebody package together Jefferson and Garrett Wilson for Puka Nacua and Amari Hampton. Now, maybe this looks a little bit weird because obviously Wilson's the secondary piece in this asset, but frankly, I would rather have Puka over Jefferson at this point in fantasy, and I would rather have Amari Hampton over Garrett Wilson. I have Garrett Wilson ranked as my wide receiver 13 in the same tier with Ladd, A.J. Brown, Evans, Harrison, T. Higgins, Cortland Sutton. If your league mates really don't know what they are doing, I would love to sell Garrett Wilson for either Ladd McConkey or A.J. Brown. Now, moving over to what we have with Igbuka himself. This is the hottest player in fantasy football. It is not even remotely close, to be honest. Every single person and their mom understands he was a great wide receiver at Ohio State. Maybe the numbers weren't crazy, but that's because you consistently had to go up against some of the best wide receiver competition in all of college football with names like Marvin Harrison Jr., Jackson Smith and Jigba, and the wide receiver one in the 2027 class, Jeremiah Smith. And Igbuka goes round 1 in the NFL draft. All of training camp, every report that comes out of Tampa is hyping up exactly how good Igbuka is, exactly how pro-ready he is, and the fact that he can be used all over the field. And you combine all of that with him crushing week 1. Like if you play DFS, I know a lot of people had Igbuka in their cash game lineups. They had him in tournament lineups. And obviously, he did extremely well. You had 2 receiving touchdowns for Igbuka, 4 receptions, 67 receiving yards. So he clears over 20 points in his first NFL game ever. Now, if I take a step backwards and I look at the projections for this offense going into the future, this is not a Baltimore Ravens level team. This is not a Buffalo Bills level team. Even just looking at week 2, you have an implied team total of about 20 points for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, where sportsbooks are projecting after Liam Cohen's gone, you actually only have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers as a middle-of-the-road offense. I'm not going to say they're going to be bad like the New York Jets, but I don't think that they're going to be an elite unit. So then I project this out into the second half of the season, and I'm going to look at the target competition Igbuka will have. Right now, Godwin's saying he's coming back in week 5. Whether that's going to happen or not, I don't exactly know, but We have 4 more weeks with no Godwin. Eventually, Jalen McMillan's going to come back. And don't get me wrong, Jalen McMillan has less talent in his entire body than Igbukah has in his left pinky finger. Like, obviously, Igbukah runs laps around Jalen McMillan, but I do think it's going to disperse the target share just a bit through all the options in this offense. And then if we go over and we look at the actual target opportunities that he had in week 1, he only had 6 targets. This was the same Marcus Sterling Shepard. This was fewer than Mike Evans, who still looked to be the wide receiver 1 on this team. So for me with Igbukah, I 100% acknowledge he's a phenomenal talent. But I think if we are looking at the price point that people are getting for him in trades right now, it's just taken a step too far. In Dynasty in 2026 and beyond, when he's the clear number 1 wide receiver in Tampa, I think he is going to just print money. But once you get Godwin back, if you have 3 wide receivers fighting for targets, it may be a little bit tougher. I saw somebody trade Igbukah and DeAndre Swift for McCaffrey and Hollywood Brown. Honestly, I don't care at all about Hollywood in this deal, but I would trade Igbukah and Swift for CMC quite easily. I saw somebody take Igbukah and Keon Coleman, trade them for Drake London. And while I understand, yes, Igbukah outscored London week 1, one of these wide receivers had 15 targets and the other one had 6. And then we saw somebody trade Igbukah and Jalen Warren, another player we'll talk about later on, for Josh Jacobs. And for me personally, who has Josh Jacobs in the flock league and I need a wide receiver, I would not look to make this trade. Now, going over and looking at what we have with Zay Flowers. Zay Flowers was a must-start wide receiver for us last week. And the reason for that is the Baltimore Ravens were actually dogs in that game. So the game plan for Baltimore going into it would be like, you know what? Actually, we are going to have to open it up. We can't play conservatively. We can't just run the ball from the very beginning. No, we have to let Lamar sling it. And we saw that play out for sure. That game went over 80 points. But going into the future, how many weeks are we going to expect that the Baltimore Ravens are actually dogs in their matchup? How many weeks are we going to expect that the Baltimore Ravens actually lose? I mean, definitely not in week 2. Right now, you actually have the Baltimore Ravens projected to be the number 1 team in the NFL, both with their points scored this week, as well as the spread in their game at about 12.5. So my thing with Zay Flowers is if I look in the long term here, I do think we're going to get a few more targets going in the direction of Rashad Bateman. And at the same time, Isaiah Likely is not going to be out for the entire season. I think Likely comes in a couple weeks and just disperses the targets here a bit. And on top of this, we actually will have this team more so run heavy. And if you want to say, Mason, you're an idiot, Lamar Jackson's going to be so efficient, he could have 40 passing touchdowns. My comeback to that would be, yeah, that could be true. Lamar Jackson could have 40 passing touchdowns, but at the same time, he had 41 last season, and Zay Flowers was a wide receiver 3. If I'm looking at recent trades, we already discussed the Garrett Wilson, Zay Flowers trade for Drake London. I saw another one where somebody traded Zay Flowers and Breece Hall for Malik Neighbors. I would actually rather have Neighbors there. And somebody traded Zay Flowers for Chuba Hubbard in a half PPR format where, in my opinion, you should be giving the slight premium to the RB. Now, of course, if you're having issues like making trades or finding deals that you can do, I would highly recommend using the trade finder on flockfantasy.com. It's completely free and the trade calculator is as well. And in my opinion, the number 1 trade calculator you could possibly find, free or paid, it doesn't matter, is on flockfantasy.com. We have spent so much money investing into it and so much time investing into it to accurately determine the value fall off that you have from the actual top end players in fantasy like Malik Neighbors versus the good players in fantasy like Zay Flowers. So I'd highly recommend, if you're ever going to make a trade, at least throw it through the trade calculator once to make sure you're not losing the deal. Now, our next wide receiver is somebody that I hope I'm wrong with, because I have drafted so much Michael Pittman Jr. in underdog best ball drafts that whenever he has a random spike like he did week 1, my teams are printing cash. My issue with it is if you're in an ESPN league, if you're in a Yahoo league, if you're in a sleeper league, I think that you're going to have a very difficult time predicting when Michael Pittman Jr. is going to spike. Because based off what we had with the usage week 1, I would actually assume that the tight end in Tyler Warren is the number 1 target here for the Indianapolis Colts. I would combine this with the rushing touchdowns we saw in Indianapolis in comparison to the passing TDs, where we had multiple rushing touchdowns from Daniel Jones, not even a rushing touchdown from Jonathan Taylor, and you still only had 1 passing touchdown from DJ. We know that the Miami Dolphins actually have one of the worst secondaries in the entire NFL. Now, do I do the research to figure out if that's true or not, or do I just listen to other people on podcasts podcast saying that it is. It's probably the latter, but after seeing week one, I'm going to run with it. And then going over and looking at Josh Downs, I really hope that Michael Pittman Jr. comes through. He crushes Josh Downs this season. Y'all know I've made arguments for Michael Pittman Jr. all offseason, considering that he was playing with the broken back last year that really did open the door for Josh Downs. But if we're projecting this going into the future, I would say that Downs is probably going to be like the co-wide receiver one on this team with Pittman. I don't think Pittman's going to run away with this. I would expect Downs to start a little slower this year, given the fact that he was dealing with the hamstring injury pretty much all of camp. So I think Josh Downs will expand his role. I think Tyler Warren's the number one option. And for Michael Pittman Jr., if he's not going to be the alpha, and if you're in an offense where Daniel Jones is your QB, I think that he's just not going to be a consistent start. He could be a bye week fill-in. In best ball, he can give you random usable weeks, but it's going to be very difficult to actually put him in your lineup and know what you're getting. So looking at some of these trades, we saw somebody trade Malik Neighbors, Keenan Allen, and Michael Pittman Jr. for Jamar Chase. If you do that in like a regular fantasy football trade calculator that didn't really understand the value drop-off that you have from Chase to Neighbors, maybe they say that you want the package, but the reality of the situation is you threw it in our trade calculator. I haven't even done it yet, but I can almost guarantee you it's going to tell you that you want Chase. I saw somebody trade Pittman for Terry McLaurin. Obviously, Terry had like 2 points week one. Pittman drops a ton, so I understand the short-term panic that the Terry McLaurin owner may have. But for me in the long term, I think Washington's going to be a much better offense, while at the same time, we've had the longer track record from Terry being relevant. And then looking at what we had with our last trade, this one's maybe a little more controversial, but I think I would still rather have Calvin Ridley over Michael Pittman Jr. in fantasy. And the reason for this is I don't necessarily think either offense is going to be that much better than the other one. Now, don't get me wrong. I'd say the Colts will be better than the Titans, but I don't think the Colts are going to be great. And if I'm looking at the target competition with Calvin Ridley, you have a day 3 rookie with Alec Eomanor who looks pretty good, but he's not established as an alpha, where Pittman, I think Tyler Warren is much more competition, as well as Josh Downs as well. Now let's move over to some running backs. I do want to talk about Tyrone Tracy. With Tracy, you'll see that he's higher in my weekly rankings than where I have him rest of season. And the reason for this is I think Tyrone Tracy just benefited from the Cam Scadaboo hamstring injury in camp, which really allowed Tracy to run away with this job as the true RB1 in this backfield. Now, was he efficient whatsoever in week one? No. I mean, Tyrone Tracy came through. He averaged 2.4 yards per carry. He averaged about 2 yards per target. So the efficiency was horrendous, but the volume's very safe at the beginning of the year specifically. You had 50 out of 68 total snaps. Devin Singletary actually operated as the RB2, whereas Cam Scadaboo operated as the RB3. But based off their prospect profiles coming into the league, I think Tyrone Tracy is a short-term starting back, where in the long term, this is going to turn into probably closer to a 50-50 backfield split. And in the long term, I don't know if Tyrone Tracy is going to be startable in a committee. Now, full transparency, I said the same thing with Chuba Hubbard last year. I thought that Jonathan Brooks was eventually going to come in and turn that into a running back by committee in a bad offense. And Jonathan Brooks tore his ACL, and Chuba Hubbard ran away as a league winner. So that's the concern that you have with Tracy, is he holds down the job all year long, and me saying that he's a sell looks horrendous. But looking at the price points, like Tracy and Jordan Mason for JSN. I know you're not getting that in your league. I just thought it was funny to include here. Tyrone Tracy, Keenan Allen, and Devonta Smith for Jonathan Taylor. If you could get it, I would. But a more realistic trade is somebody trading like Tyrone Tracy and Trey McBride for Amon-Ra St. Brown. I think buying low on St. Brown's a great idea. Now, I do want to talk about Dylan Sampson here, because I see a lot of people super pumped about Dylan Sampson. Obviously, we had him as a waiver wire pickup a couple weeks back when we had the Quinshon Judkins fiasco going on. And Dylan Sampson clearly established himself as the starting running back over Jerome Ford in the short term here, where the efficiency wasn't great with Dylan Sampson. He averaged like 2.5 yards per carry. But as a receiver, Dylan Sampson had 8 receptions and 64 receiving yards. So just the receiving stat line alone in his first NFL game ever actually made him a viable fantasy start. Now, here's my concern with Dylan Sampson after he had 20 opportunities in his first game ever. Quinshon Judkins is a much better player. You can go back and look at the prospect profiles of these guys. You can go back and look at the team investment into these two running backs. And while I would not expect Quinshon Judkins to come in this week and be the starter over Dylan Sampson had all of camp. He had the first week as well. Judkins has had nothing. I do think as we project forward in the NFL season, Quinshon Judkins will be the lead back. Dylan Sampson will probably operate on third downs. And at the end of the day, while the Cleveland Browns were able to be a functional offense week 1 with 290 passing yards and 49 rushing yards. The reality of the situation is they just went up against one of the softest defenses in the NFL with the Cincinnati Bengals. If you look at the projections this week, right now the Browns project to be the worst offense in the NFL, which I actually think that's going to be a quite common occurrence for them. And if I think in the long term, Dylan Sampson is effectively the running back 2 in the worst offense in the league, even if he's a great receiving back, I'm not that excited with it. Looking at some trades, obviously, you can just kind of use Dylan Sampson as a throw-in. You're never going to be able to trade Dylan Sampson straight up for someone exciting, but maybe you could go through and go like Dylan Sampson, Khalil Shakir for Travis Etienne. I would love that. Dylan Sampson, Amari Hampton, Jalen Waddle for Jonathan Taylor. I would love that. Dylan Sampson, A.J. Brown, and Loveland for Amon-Ra St. Brown and Keon Coleman. I'd absolutely love that as well because I don't know if Sampson's going to be a reliable start going into the future. And somebody that I had really high in our weekly rankings last week that I think we kind of got lucky with was Jaylen Warren. Now, my expectations for Jaylen Warren week 1, to be honest, was I thought he was going to run away with this job. I thought he was going to be the clear RB1 in Pittsburgh. I thought you were going to see a little bit of Kenneth Gainwell, a little bit of Caleb Johnson, and I was completely wrong with this. I mean, it's just shocking to see. While Jaylen Warren obviously scores more points, while Jaylen Warren has the 11 carries in comparison to Kenneth Gainwell at 7, while Jaylen Warren does get the 22 receiving yards in comparison to Kenneth Gainwell with only 4, Kenneth Gainwell played more snaps. Kenneth Gainwell ran more routes. It looks like Kenneth Gainwell realistically may be the third down running back for this team. Kenneth Gainwell played all 8 third downs for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And why this is really concerning is we know Caleb Johnson should be expected to expand his role as the season goes on. This isn't going to happen in the short term. We know that. But in the long term, when Caleb Johnson expands his role, Caleb Johnson's not a third down running back. Caleb Johnson's a first and second down hammer. So if we're looking at Kenneth Gainwell being the third down back, while I don't think Gainwell's any good, I think Jaylen Warren's way better than him. They paid Jaylen Warren. Maybe they transition Jaylen Warren over to being the third down back once they get Caleb Johnson going. For the time being, I think Caleb Johnson may take more from Jaylen Warren in the long term. Because again, you look at these snap charts from PFF, you had Jaylen Warren with 19 early down snaps in comparison to Kenneth Gainwell with 18. So they legitimately split the backfield 50-50 on early downs. But with the third downs, Kenneth Gainwell had 8, where Jaylen Warren had 0. So I think he got lucky with the Jaylen Warren receiving touchdown. Jaylen Warren's never really been that strong of a running back in Pittsburgh. So I think you're looking at probably a bad offense, running back by committee. And we got lucky to start Jaylen Warren last week. And looking at where I have him in our rankings, I would sell Jaylen Warren for J.K. Dobbins, also a committee back in the short term. His job will be taken in the long term, but at least he's in a better offense. I would sell him for Quinshon Judkins. Judkins, garbage offense, but ultimately I think his role will expand as time goes on. I would sell him for Charbonnet. I'd sell him for Aaron Jones. And how I'd sell Jaylen Warren for Jordan Mason, because if anything, I'd expect Aaron Jones to fade as the year goes. But I think that's all I got for you. I really appreciate you hanging out with us in this video. Again, I would highly recommend before you make any fantasy football trades ever to use the free resources we built for you. Go and use the trade calculator. In my opinion, it's by far and away the best trade calculator you're going to find at accurately determining what those top level players are worth, where you can't just go through and throw a bunch of crappy pieces in a package and then say all of a sudden, oh, this is worth more than Bijan Robinson, because it's not. And also, if you're having a tough time coming up with the trade, you could always use the trade finder on the site as well. But I'm going to leave the link to flockfantasy.com in the description as well as the comment section. I really appreciate you hanging out with us, and I really hope we get to see you out with the live stream later tonight.